Heartbreak at Camp Mystic. New information about what happened during the catastrophic Texas floods is leaving people with even more questions. Plus, Secret Service suspensions. Nearly a year to the day after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, 6 agents are placed on leave. And that cup of joe is gonna cost you more dough. What's behind the rapid rise in coffee prices? I'll give you one guess. Okay, it's tariffs. Those stories and more today, Friday, July 11th. I'm Caitlin Becker, and this is the New York Postcast. As Russia ramps up its deadly bombardment on Ukraine, heart-wrenching stories are beginning to emerge. One brutal attack this week took the life of a 1-year-old little boy while he was playing outside at his great-grandmother's house. Local residents say the child was mercilessly and deliberately executed, and they're accusing the Russians of playing a game of human safari. So here's what they mean by that. Russia and Ukraine are both known to use first-person view drones. These drones allow soldiers to remotely see exactly what or who they're targeting, in this case, a toddler. Now, the United States has been seeking an end to these types of targeted attacks, and so Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Thursday with his Russian counterpart, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Now, Rubio told reporters after the meeting that the two men shared ideas for peace negotiations and said that the strategy they discussed is a, quote, new and different approach.
I wouldn't characterize it as something that guarantees a peace, but it's a concept that we'll take back to the president today. And
the high-level meeting came just hours after Russia launched the second massive attack on Ukraine in as many days. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says 400 drones and 18 missiles were launched, mostly at the capital of Kyiv, killing 2. Now, back in the U.S., it's been almost a year since the assassination attempt on the life of then-candidate Donald Trump during a Butler, Pennsylvania campaign rally. After an exhaustive investigation, the Secret Service is now suspending multiple agents in connection with the July 13, 2024 shooting. 4 agents from the Pittsburgh field office are being placed on leave, as well as another agent who's part of the counter-sniper team, and the last, Agent Mayasati Perez. Now, of the 6, Perez was the only one officially on the now president's personal detail. Specifically, she was tasked with walking through the venue to inspect and secure it ahead of the rally where the candidate was shot. In an interview with his daughter-in-law, Lara, Trump sent to air on Fox News this weekend, the president says the Secret Service had a bad day in Butler, but added that he still has, quote, great confidence in these people. And now to some truly wild allegations involving a satanic cult, ritual sacrifices, and a cover-up by law enforcement. Now, this absolutely bonkers story out of New Jersey stems from a recently filed lawsuit in the state. According to these court documents, a local police chief is secretly leading a devil-worshipping cult where children were assaulted, some even burned in sacrifice, while groups of men use secret tunnels in the woods to do their bidding. Yes, I know what that sounds like. The wild claims are being made by a young woman, the daughter of the police chief in question. Her suit alleges that she and her siblings were violently molested by their father for over a decade, adding that much of her small-town neighborhood was in on it. Now, lawyers for her father and one neighbor say that the outrageous claims were investigated by local, state, and federal authorities, even the Department of Homeland Security, and they were deemed to be unfounded, and that one neighbor is countersuing for defamation. Now to our big story, Heartbreak at Camp Mystic. The Christian girls' camp in Kerr County, Texas, has really become the gut-wrenching center of the Texas flooding tragedy. Nearly 30 campers and counselors all lost their lives in the raging waters, and more are still missing after the Guadalupe River rapidly overflowed its banks in the early hours of July 4th. Now, 1 week later, we're getting a clearer picture about what happened and why that camp in particular was so impacted. So where the cabins were situated on the campground could be to blame. At least 19 of those cabins were in a known flood zone, some of them in a floodway labeled extremely hazardous. Just 6 years ago, the camp went through a $5 million expansion, but rather than moving the cabins to higher or safer ground, they actually added more units to the existing flood zone. New York Post reporter Anthony Blair is digging into all of this, and he joins me now. Anthony, can you tell me a bit more about the floodway that is deemed extremely hazardous? Kind of explain that area of the camp to me.
Absolutely. So essentially, the floodway is part of the floodplain, and the idea of it is to keep it as free as an area of next to the riverbank that should be kept as free as possible from any sort of construction or major development, with the idea being that this allows floodwaters, when they do come inevitably, to pass through and not sort of stay around. And in most counties and states, there are strict laws on any sort of construction or heavy development in floodways. But what seems to have been the case uh, with Camp Mystic is that there was indeed construction on some of these floodways, some of it less than a football field's length from the riverbank.
As I'm listening to what you're saying, it sounds like almost the opposite of what happened here. Have we heard from the camp or are authorities saying anything about why these particular cabins were allowed to be built in harm's way?
No, the camps so far have said very, very little about this construction. What we do know is that in 2019, around $5 million was spent on updating the campsite and constructing new cabins. It was quite a historic camp. It's been there since 1926. And, many of these new cabins were actually built right in the path of the floods, even some of them that were built on a slightly higher area, kind of just south of the main campsite on a little bit of a hillside. There was still, federal kind of topographical data of the river shows that these were still in the path of the floods, in the case of a historic once in a century flood, which is what we appear to be dealing with here in central Texas. But no, I mean, the camp authorities have said very little. We do know that it passed the state inspection on July the 2nd, so just 2 days before the flooding. And inspectors did note that there were, emergency and evacuation procedures were in place, although we don't know exactly what these entailed.
And that, of course, leads me to the question of what happened that night. And you got some more information about what went on at the camp during the flooding and why so many people died. So what can you tell me about that?
Yes, and the reports that we're getting out, the eyewitness accounts from some of the counselors, I mean, don't forget some of these senior counselors were just 18 years old, and they've given truly harrowing accounts of a lack of power. I mean, one of the main issues that they faced on the night of the flooding was that very none of the campers and very few of the counselors appear to have had access to their mobile phones. And this was partly, the idea was that the children were going to go and be kids and unplug from the modern world and from technology, which is an admirable idea, but it does appear to have led to a situation where a lot of people were not able to contact emergency authorities, and many people were woken up by the rising floodwaters. In addition, the camp appears to have lost all internet service, so it was cut off from the outside world. There's one counselor gave a particularly harrowing account of, standing on the porch of a flooded cabin, shining a flashlight and turning it off and on to try and gain the attention of rescue crews. Camp owners were sort of driving between the cabins, trying to wake up the children. And several others were sort of climbing onto roofs and stuff, and they could hear that in a neighboring cabin, some of the girls singing some of the camp songs, sort of about God's love, etc. So it does seem to have just been a truly harrowing situation where essentially there was a spell, and the exact timeline of this is still remarkably unclear almost a week later, but it does seem to have been a spell of at least 2 or 3 hours between the flooding starting and the emergency services or the authorities in Kerr County, Texas, being aware of exactly how desperate the situation was at places such as Camp Mystic.
Just hearing you recount some of those stories gives you chills. Just a truly horrific, horrific event. Anthony Blair, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A Texas pediatrician was fired and subsequently canceled this week for suggesting that Trump supporters in Texas got what they voted for with the fatal flooding, and now she is begging for forgiveness. In a widely circulated post, Dr. Christina Probst wrote in part, "Kerr County MAGA voted to gut FEMA. They deny climate change. May they get what they voted for. Bless their hearts." Now, she was swiftly fired by her employer, Bluefish Pediatrics, and criticized mercilessly in the media. Now, she says she's sorry and claims that she wrote her initial post before she knew anyone had died. The death toll is well over 100 people, many of whom were children. Now, in an attempt to do some damage control, the doctor penned an apology, saying in part, quote, "The words written were mine, and regardless of how they are being presented, that is a fact that I deeply regret. I want to apologize to each and every individual suffering through terrible loss in this difficult time. More than 160 people are still missing in the flood-ravaged area." And finally today, if you are starting your Friday morning with this very podcast and a cup of joe, I suggest you savor it while you can. The coffee, that is. The price of that delicious cup is going up again. The world's largest coffee producer is Brazil, and they are soon to be the proud owners of a fancy new 50% tariff, courtesy of President Trump. Now, coffee is traded as a commodity like gold or silver. And for those of us who need that morning jolt to survive, it is just as valuable. Now, I won't bore you with all of the numbers here, but the one you need to know is that the price for a pound of Arabica beans is now about 18% higher than it was a year ago. And that's the price hike with just the announcement from the president that the tariffs are coming. They aren't scheduled to take effect until August 1st. But if and when they do, coffee watchers fear prices could go up even more. So if you find yourself some good Vietnamese beans, Vietnam is the second largest coffee producer in the world, those will cost you a bit less. The administration's recent trade deal with that country will only tax goods at 20%, so not that 50%. But don't get any wild ideas about just switching to tea. That is a whole other tariff talk having to do with China. It is time for me to wrap this up so that I can go out and stockpile some coffee before I can't afford it anymore. I will miss you until Monday, but you can fill the void with the New York Post in print or online, and hit that like and subscribe button for me so you never miss the New York Postcast. It's wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Have an excellent weekend, my friends.